Lucrezia Millarini. Welcome to this ITV News Coronavirus Q&A, and I'm joined by our science editor Tom Clarke to answer your questions on the Indian variant. Tom, let's just start a little bit more now. The number of cases of the variant detected in the UK risen by more than 2,000 in a week. That's the latest figures. So how concerned should we be that variant, and how well will the vaccines work against it? We're going to get to that in just a second. But first, can you give us a quick summary of the spread of the Indian variant in the UK at the moment?
I wish I could give you a simple answer, but it's quite a complicated one, right? So if you, by one measure, it's extremely worrying indeed. We're seeing a very fast increase in the number of cases in certain parts of the UK. There's a few hotspots, mainly in the northwest of England. You might have heard of Bolton, Blackburn with Darwin. They've had very sharp rises of cases, and that's what's got people particularly concerned about this variant that was first identified in India. However, what we know, lots of people returning from India, I think a lot of that travel happened just before India was added to the red list. People realised, we need to get back before it gets difficult. We know that lots of cases of this variant were imported into the UK around the same time into multiple different locations. And what's going to be really interesting, what we're already seeing, it's not behaving the same way everywhere. And that's the crucial question, because what scientists are trying to figure out right now, how much more transmissible is this virus? We know it is more transmissible. I think they're confident of that. How much more so? They're now coming down the opinion it's probably not as transmissible as it's looking in those real hotspot areas, because they were sort of effectively super spreader events that don't represent the whole picture. Okay. We need to see how it behaves in these other locations now. Okay, well, Tom, listen, lots to talk about, lots of questions. Let's start off with now the impact of the variant and the vaccine's effectiveness. Sandra Footit asks on Twitter, does the current vaccine cover the Indian variant? Yes. Okay. So that's the simple answer. All the vaccines that we have, as far as we know, cover all the variants. However, they probably work to slightly varying degrees, and that's what we still don't have a clear answer for anybody that's got that query. It certainly looks like there is some slight effect of effectiveness. So we've already seen, for example, in Bolton, there are a number of 25 people, the Secretary of State told us a couple of days ago, in hospital. Quite a few of those have only had one dose of the vaccine. So we know that it's possible to get infected and go to hospital if you've had one dose. They don't think with two doses. 90% of people in hospital have not had two doses. So it's likely there is good protection. So I suppose in some, the vaccines do work. They're definitely going to reduce your risk of getting sick with any variant of this virus. So it's really important you get your vaccine, but there may be some subtle impact, and we're still trying to figure out what that was.
Well, that kind of links to the next question that we have, which is from Gary on Twitter, who asks, what effect does this variant have on vaccinated people with 1 and 2 doses? So there's a difference there. He also asks, he's got 3 questions actually, has anyone died of this variant who has been totally vaccinated? What are the demographics of those getting infected?
Right, so you might have to remind me of those as we go through, but first of all, yes, it appears one dose likely offers some benefits. What we're seeing is the most infections are in younger people, many fewer infections with the India variant. Remember, we're talking about, I should have said at the beginning, we're talking about really small numbers here still. We're still, although cases went up by 2,000 in a week, we've only got 3,500 cases around that at the moment. So compared to the 60,000 cases a day we were having back in January at the peak of the Kent variant outbreak, this is still small. So we haven't got a huge amount of numbers to go with here, but people who've had a vaccine do seem to be getting infected less, because we're not seeing as many older people getting infected in variants. So that might be a signal the vaccine is having an effect. However, yes, of the people in hospital, the majority of them have not had both doses, and what they're inferring from that is 2 doses give you much better protection. And we know that anyway. 2 doses give you much better protection against any kind of COVID, and that would apply to the new variant. The second question:
has anyone died of the variant who hasn't been vaccinated?
I'll be totally honest with you, I don't know about mortality with this variant. It's still quite early days. People tend to take quite a while to get seriously ill and die. I'm not certain if anybody has died as a result of the new variant yet. I would have to go and check. It's possible that data isn't available yet, so I'll just have to pass on that one, I'm afraid.
Once again, on the demographics, what are the demographics of those getting infected? Which links to the second question, from another person I'm going to ask. Is it affecting people who have been vaccinated, or young people who haven't? So
this sort of touches on that question we had at the beginning. We've sort of talked about it before. It seems to be, certainly in those real hotspot areas, it seems to be in younger people. Now, is that because they're unvaccinated, therefore less protected, or is it because, like we've seen with new variants being introduced before, that when the Kent variant first arrives, it tends to spread in those people who do the most mixing. And right now, it's kids in school and things like that. That's where there's a lot of mixing going on, young people who are socialising more. Yeah. So it's not immediately obvious what's going on, but I think the assumption is one of the reasons we're not seeing it in slightly older generations is the vaccine is offering quite good protection.
Okay, which is positive, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
A few questions on testing.
Yeah.
So Esther King asks, how can they tell from the test which variant it is? That's going to be a complicated answer, I think. She also says the PCR tests are entirely unreliable. This is what Esther says, and so is lateral flow. I honestly want to know where they are finding these strains.
Great. Okay, fair question. I disagree with that point about the tests being unreliable. We know they're working fairly well because we're able to pick up things like this and see that they're happening. I would go back to how do they test it? So it's quite an interesting one. The test that they developed for what I call COVID Classic, the one that originally came from China, has 3 different genes it looks for. When the Kent variant came along, it's only test positive for 2 of those genes. So they were able to spot the Kent variant really quickly because it has a very distinct profile on that PCR test. So when you give your swab, they'll know whether you've got the Kent variant. Now, Kent variant is now the dominant strain. The India variant and others like the South Africa variant, the P1 strain from Brazil, they've got all 3. So now they can use that difference to see where these new variants are popping up. Because all the new cases we're seeing in these places tend to be new variant cases, they can use that little signal to tell. To confirm it's a new variant, they have to send your sample off to a different lab and do its entire genetic sequence. And they do that to confirm the case. So those 3,000, whatever we were talking about, those have been confirmed by a much different test.
This is a question I want to address because I know what you're going to say. Lee asks, how do they test for the different variants? I think you've just answered that. But then they say PCR tests are only 7% accurate. That's not true.
That's not true. No, that's not true.
How accurate are they then? Because a lot of people seem to think that they're not very accurate.
I can't pluck a figure out of my head, but I think we're talking about 99-ish% accurate
so a lot
for
more than
PCR
7%.
tests. There is some failure rate. Most often the sample isn't very good. They can't find the DNA, but the PCR test is very good. Now, obviously, those lateral flow tests, the ones where we swab ourselves and put a blob on the thing, like parents might be doing for their school children or school kids might be doing themselves, or those who are going to work for testing. Yes, it's true, they are less accurate, but when it comes to a positive test, again, they are, if used properly, they can be sort of upwards of 90% sensitive as well. So I wouldn't say the tests are a complete bust at all. There is some problems with them, but my goodness, we are a lot better off doing a lot of testing than none at all, because remember how we were back at the beginning of the outbreak, we couldn't even see these trends and these surges in cases coming. So I think testing has, although it's not perfect, and we have seen some failures even recently with the test and trace system, it is way better than it was, and I think really the tests are proving their worth.
And I suppose it's why that message, if there is surge testing in your area to detect the presence of a variant, go and get a test even if you don't have symptoms. It's important, isn't it?
Absolutely, and it's given the numbers going around the UK at the moment are so low, the number of cases, we're averaging 2,000 a day across the whole of England. Your chance of testing positive is small, so it's a bit of a chore having a test when you almost certainly know you're going to be negative. But even if you're not that bothered about whether you are helping for that research question. Are these variants spreading? How are they spreading? What areas are they in? So if you've got the time and can do the effort, it is actually quite a useful thing to do just to help inform us about where these outbreaks are going.
Yeah, exactly. Let's move on to 2 questions now on local lockdowns and the areas identified as most affected. Ian Moore asks, is there any danger of Lancashire going into lockdown because of this, the Indian variant? Could we see regional lockdowns rather than localised lockdowns? How widespread would cases have to be for that to happen?
Now, we've been asking this, and we've been asking government, are you going to go back? Even though they said, we don't want to put anyone back into lockdown, are you going to consider it if we have these hotspots? And this is where the outbreak might go now, in pockets of areas where vaccination might not be as high, or you've got particular circumstances. Now, it's interesting, the last few days since the Indian variant came along, they've become a little less, they're a bit more vague about whether we might see local lockdowns. They haven't ruled it out. I could say, though, however, you talk to local authority bosses, you talk to the Mayor of Manchester, Andy Burnham, for example, who looks after large chunks of Lancashire that are affected, Bolton, for example. He said that is really a situation we do not want to return to. I mean, there's a couple of reasons for that. Partly, they're seen as quite unfair, but also there was some evidence they didn't work very well to prevent transmission before. I think, given we've got the vaccine now, and vaccination rates are pretty high across the UK. We still need to wait to see the evidence on these variants and how well the vaccines work, but there is still every reason to think the vaccines are going to make a huge amount of difference. We may not need them. It may never come to that local lockdown scenario. And also with rates low and testing being quite good, it's possible, hopefully, if we use that testing, surge testing and isolation, etc., we might be able to contain these outbreaks without the need for a local lockdown, because they are very unpopular at a local level, and some evidence just they don't really work very well.
Okay. You like this one, Tom. Karen Edwards asks, I'd like to know why Bolton and Blackburn in particular have been singled out in the media yet again. As I understand it, there are cases in over 80 areas. That's
a great question, Karen. I mean, it may seem that we're sort of singling them unfairly. There are, 80 areas. I have to admit, she may have more up-to-date figures than me. I haven't checked recently because there are, as I said, lots of cases. I think we had 76 certainly when the government first announced the presence of the India variant. Yeah, it's everywhere. What's going on in Bolton and Blackburn with Darwin? We just saw these very sharp rises in cases, and in terms of numbers, they've got high. Now, it's fair to say, actually, in Greater London, we've got. I haven't checked, actually, maybe slightly overtaken by Lancashire now, but we had more numbers of the India variant initially in Greater London. But again, the outbreaks there aren't we're not seeing the same acceleration in cases as far as we can tell from the testing so far. So it's really, it was the speed of transmission that was going on in those areas. I would say, the other areas they were looking at, for example, were Bedford, and we did talk about it, we have covered Bedford and Sefton, for example, on the outskirts of Liverpool. Quite big outbreaks there. One of the interesting signals in Sefton, for example, though, is they had quite a rapid increase in cases, but it seems to have come down again. And that's another reason the scientists are looking very closely at those. Why is the virus behaving differently in those areas? Could it be it's actually nothing to do with the virus itself? It's about the numbers of cases that were brought in. Did they get into schools or particular groups with maybe, as people have said, it's certainly in poorer places like Bolton, it's had high rates of transmission before. It's an area of known deprivation, multiple generational occupancy, maybe lower vaccination rates. It could explain it, in which case, obviously that's something they need to get on top of, but it's kind of, in a way, quite good news in terms of the whole of the country, where vaccination rates are higher. We might not see this play out elsewhere. Okay.
We've also had questions from some people who doubted the impact of the variant or questioned its timing. Jim Diltry asks, where's the evidence that the Indian variant is such a major concern? He cites the reduced cases and death figures and suggests talk of the threat of the variant may in fact be exaggerated. So what's your answer to that?
I think that's, out of all of this, maybe I should have said that more at the beginning. That is a really important point, and I think to a degree he's absolutely right. We don't know that this variant is going to present a major problem, but what we know from before, for example with the Kent variant, it didn't look that bad at the beginning. They were keeping their eye on the Kent variant for a few weeks, perhaps a month or so before they realised, oh my goodness, it's going very fast. The reason we had such a massive surge in cases in January that, remember, led to tens of thousands of people dying was because of a more transmissible variant. So I think what the scientists are doing here, they are acting with an abundance of alarm and caution over the potential impact this variant could have. I think it's maybe my job to keep reminding people, but we don't know for certain yet. It might come to very little indeed. Let's all hope it does, actually. But for the time being, I think it's attracting that level of scrutiny and alarm from the scientists, because they have seen this happen before, and we definitely can't afford to let it happen again, especially that variant showing up just as we're unlocking. Not great timing if it does turn out to be a problem, but I think it is fair to say we don't know yet.
Well, this kind of brings me on to the next question, which is from Craig Allison, and he asks, why do variants of concern seem to arise just before restrictions are about to be lifted? Every time, Brazil, South African, Kent, now Indian.
The timing does seem to be quite suspicious, doesn't it? And I remember I was myself looking forward to Christmas. I was looking forward to spending time with my family. When the Kent variant first hit our awareness and started showing itself, it does seem to be, as soon as we get our hopes up, start to feel we're relaxed, these things come along. I have to say it's just down to chance. One thing we are, though, seeing now, and I don't think, and I was talking to senior scientists in government, Patrick Vallance, the chief scientist, in fact, we did an interview with him today about something else, mentioned to be, we knew the virus had the ability to spread, to mutate. We didn't expect it to do it so quickly. And what we've seen it's almost sped up. The interesting numbers of new variants seem to be emerging sort of thicker and faster in a way as the virus sort of refines itself and evolves. In a way, though, that's a symptom of what's going on globally. Although in the UK we might have brought cases right down, remember internationally we've got way more COVID cases now globally as part of the pandemic than we had before, and that's where new variants can arise. So wherever you've got transmission, you'll have them. So I know the timing looks suspicious, but it ain't. I'm almost, I can hand on heart say I'm pretty confident of that one.
Yeah, I want to talk to you about, we touched on the vaccine and the importance of getting the vaccine, of course, but when it comes to the variants, and we've talked about this before on previous Coronavirus What You Need to Know podcasts, haven't we? But how difficult, how easy is it to tweak the vaccines, if you like, to respond to these new variants that we are seeing and we're likely to see more of?
Yeah, I mean, the hope, of course, is we won't really need to tweak the vaccines, that if you've had both doses of the vaccine, and the government obviously is trying to speed up the vaccination campaign to do that, we might not need new variants, vaccines against new variants. Yeah. But if we did, the wonderful thing about these new coronavirus vaccines that we've created, particularly the ones based on what's called mRNA, the RNA vaccines like the Pfizer vaccine, the Moderna vaccine are example of that. Theoretically, they're very quick to tweak. The companies have already done it to tweak them against certain variants, like the South Africa variant, the P1. So they're probably now working on variants against vaccines against the Indian variants. There's a few different types of Indian variant. So it shouldn't take too long. It's I understand, talking to people in the vaccine industry, by winter, which is likely when they'd be a problem if they were going to be, we could have those new vaccines available to do rounds of booster jabs. And as our listeners might have heard, the government's already said they're looking to doing a sort of autumn-winter vaccine boosting campaign anyway. So again, even if we get bad news in terms of the vaccine, it could cause us trouble in the short to medium term, but long term, we'll have that covered, I think, with vaccines.
You talked to Sir Patrick Vallance today, didn't you, earlier on?
Yeah.
We've heard from various scientists, medical authorities, that there is still concern there could be a possible third wave later on in the year, around autumn or around Christmas. I mean, how concerned should we be about that as well? So
when we did that first step of unlocking back in April, the data was really clear. In fact, even the data that went into us locking on Monday, 17th of May, was really clear. We're looking good. The vaccines are giving us much better protection we thought. The rates are really, really low. We're in good shape. That's still the case, but with these variants popping up, it does raise questions about how quickly they could spread. If they are that much more transmissible than the variant we currently live with, the Kent variant, that could be enough to cause increase in hospitalisation deaths, because although lots of people are vaccinated, the vaccine's not perfect. 5-10% of people won't be protected. Remember, 5-10% of people will never get vaccinated, either because they can't or they won't. That adds up to quite a few people across the UK, millions in fact, who are vulnerable to COVID. So there's still the potential for a significant wave just from transmissibility. If there's a problem with the vaccines as well, that could further add to that. So theoretically, I have to say it's really theoretical, you could have quite a serious problem with a variant. I'm not saying that's going to happen. We haven't got the evidence to suggest that yet, but that's why we're worried, and that's why the academics following this are concerned, because that's what we need to sort of prevent. The longer we can hold these variants at bay and get more and more people vaccinated, the lower that potential peak becomes, and we can look forward to getting out of this.
You're speaking to experts every day, aren't you, pretty much, for a lot of the day?
Pretty much.
Are you getting a sense from them? We are starting to unlock, aren't we? We've got this June 21st date in mind, this Freedom Day, haven't we? Do you get a sense from them that there is a bit of nerves, a bit of trepidation that as we start to do this, we might start to lose control a little bit? What are they saying to you?
There were nerves when we unlocked anyway, even before the India variant popped up, that we were going to have unexpected things occur. We haven't had the variant. We haven't had people indoors with these variants bumbling around, for example. That might cause a problem. But they were fairly relaxed about it. I think with this India variant, now that's popped up, it's looking much more a bit more nervousness. But let's not sort of be too doom-mongery about this. We haven't seen the data yet. We have to wait another week or so, and then we're going to know. I know it's like, prolonging the agony, but we can't be certain just yet. So it's a bit early to judge it. Let's hope this variant isn't going to be too much problem, in which case we'll be much more relaxed about June and going away and all of that. But if it's not, we can't ignore it.
All of those things. Tom, I think I've kept you here longer than I should have, but there is so much to talk about as
Absolutely.
ever. Tom, thank you. Thank you so much. And that is it for this coronavirus Q&A. You can get more information and analysis on our website, itv.com/news. Thank you very much for all your questions and, of course, for joining us. Bye-bye for now.